for Max Taste No Sugar, Pepsi Black Time, 18 hours.
The news from Guyana, the region and the world. Compiled in the News Talk Radio newsroom and powered by DemeraraWaves.com.
The news comes to you compliments of KFC. It's finger licking good. With the news, I am Ruth Wilson. Good evening. First, the lead stories. Leader of the People's National Congress Reform and the opposition leader met today. If you had Sputnik vaccines, the health ministry says you can now take a Pfizer as a booster shot. In the region, the governing Barbados Labour Party is promising to give workers the legal power to pick a trade union of their choice. And internationally, New York City officials are investigating maintenance problems that may have prevented an apartment door from closing automatically and allowed a deadly fire to spread in the Bronx. Details of these and other stories in a moment.
Hate to stand in lines? Don't worry. KFC has got you covered with their drive-thrus, which are open now from 9 a.m. to 10:30 p.m. at Movietown, Vlissingen Road, Mandela Avenue, Reading Hoop, Parika, and the Amazonia Mall. That's right, you can drive through at 6 of their 9 locations. Remember, their current opening hours are 9 a.m. to 10:30 p.m. Go on down and let your taste buds savor the spices today. KFC.
It's finger licking good.
And now for the news in detail. Opposition leader Joseph Harmon and leader of the People's National Congress Reform Aubrey Norton met today. Mr. Norton could not be reached for comment, and Mr. Harmon declined to speak about the meeting. Sources close to the talks say that the two politicians had a good meeting and the situation remains the same. The PNCR's Central Executive Committee has decided that Mr. Norton should enter the National Assembly and become opposition leader. Other party sources say that the matter can possibly be taken to the National Assembly, where the main opposition parliamentarians will be required to vote on whether they will like Mr. Harmon to be removed from the post as opposition leader. Health Minister Dr. Frank Anthony says that approval has been given to use Pfizer as a booster vaccine for those persons who have received Sputnik. He says that there are very limited supplies of Johnson & Johnson vaccines, and 25,000 Johnson & Johnson doses are expected this week. The health minister says that the decision has been taken to use Pfizer as a booster.
When the committee that oversees these things within the ministry would have done that scientific evaluation, they felt that Pfizer can also be offered, and therefore we have adjusted the schedule to allow our staff to be able to give that Pfizer dose as a booster dose. So right now, if someone is desirous of having a booster and that site does not have the J&J vaccine, then they would be able to offer to the person a Pfizer vaccine. Before, they weren't able to do that because of our instructions.
The health minister says persons who have taken one dose of Johnson & Johnson must now take a second dose as a booster.
For some persons who took this single dose J&J, the advice now is for them to come back after 2 months, because in most of the medical literature right now, J&J is not considered to be only a single dose vaccine, but a requirement now after 2 months for you to get a second dose. And therefore persons who took one dose and now past the 2 months period should come back and get a second dose. So we want people to understand that.
Health Minister Dr. Frank Anthony. Meanwhile, latest official statistics show that 438 new cases have been recorded within the past 24 hours. Of the 107 persons in hospital, 8 are receiving intensive care. The Ministry of Health also says that 6,006 persons have now been ordered to isolate themselves at home to avoid spreading the disease. The Private Sector Commission, PSC, is partnering with the government of Guyana to carry out a massive cleanup exercise of the city of Georgetown. The umbrella business organization says the cleanup will be done this Friday and Saturday. According to the PSC, the exercise is being done in collaboration with the Joint Services, the Ministry of Public Works, the National Drainage and Irrigation Authority, and the Solid Waste Management Unit. The exercise will include the desilting of main canals and clearing of garbage in several areas, including West Front Road, Cemetery Road, Sheriff, Hatfield, Durban, Safan, Church, and Sussex streets. The PSC says that several businesses have already donated items towards the cleanup exercise and encourages others to support the initiative. Chairman of the PSC, Mr. Paul Chiang, said the Commission recognizes the importance of public-private partnership and is pleased to support the cleanup exercise so that Guyanese and tourists alike can transact their business in a cleaner and more comfortable environment. The PSC's support of the cleanup exercise is in direct response to a request from President Mohamed Irfaan Ali for the private sector to lend its support to making this exercise a success. A policewoman was today killed in a vehicular accident on the La Penitence public road in the vicinity of the La Penitence market. Dead is 57-year-old Dawn Booker, who was a special corporal and was attached to the Small Business Bureau. Ms. Booker resided at Perseverance, Maikoni, East Coast, Demerara. Police released video footage showing the woman riding on Safan Street when she was struck by a lorry. A breathalyzer test conducted on the driver shows that he was not under the influence of alcohol. The lorry owner and the driver are both from number 47 Village, Quarantine, Berbice. Police say that video footage shows that as Booker and another cyclist were passing each other in opposite directions, she swerved and lost control of her pedal cycle. She reportedly fell on the eastern edge of the road where she came into contact with the left rear wheel of the motor lorry. She suffered injuries to her head and other areas. You're still with us on 103.1 FM, News Talk Radio Guyana. It is 18 hours 8. We now turn to news in the region. The governing Barbados Labour Party, BLP, is promising to enact legislation to guarantee workers' right to join a union of their choice. This announcement was made on the campaign trail for the January 19 general elections. We have the details from Barbados today.
BLP candidate for St. George North, Tony Moore, at Sunday's mega manifesto meeting. She made it clear that the BLP is committed to improving the plight of the working class people and it will roll out a slew of policies in their interests.
In 2022, as I stand here before you on January the 9th, the trade unions still don't have formalized trade union processes. So that when a union wants to get involved to represent working class people, there's no clear automatic way of determining how that recognition is going to go. Rights matter. And in this Barbados Labour Party, the Barbados Workers Union is proud that in a matter of months, we would finally be rolling out a trade union recognition bill. A bill that will bring security to workers who want to join a trade union and for whom at this time, joining that trade union could be iffy sometimes because that's the very time you lose your job when people see that you're trying to have representation.
BLP candidate for Barbados' upcoming general election, Tony Moore, ending that report from Barbados today. Trinidad and Tobago's supermarkets say they are not increasing prices unfairly. That Twin Island nation, as well as countries in the Caribbean and elsewhere, have seen a steep increase in the prices of food, construction materials, agricultural inputs, and other imports. More in this report from TNT News Online.
There is no price gouging among members of the Supermarket Association in Trinidad and Tobago. This, according to President of that organization, Rajiv Dipti. Mr. Dipti noted that the majority of his members try to maintain lower costs for many goods on the shelves, but they are challenged by continued increases of basic food items on the international market. He explained that the increases are not native to this country.
Where the core food basket of goods is concerned, we always have concerns on cooking oil, flour, sugar, and it's something that continues to move. It's still benefiting from the reduction of 12.5%. Very importantly, that is removed from in the final equation of your bill at the register. And that is something, when we talk about the core food basket and we talk about those things, we try to keep with care on the shelves those goods that are considered very basic for the vulnerable consumer, because those that class of customer, that level of person that's coming into the store, you really want to ensure that they are able to buy goods for their families, because it's not just food stuff that's going up, Natalie. Of course, it's pharmaceuticals, it's everything right now due to the inflationary pressures being experienced by the pandemic.
Mr. Dipti noted that import substitution is needed to help reduce food prices. He emphasized that encouraging an enabling environment and preventing predial larceny and other crimes is a major factor. Mr. Dipti said that members of his association have expressed interest in branching out into agriculture.
We're willing to get into agriculture and getting to agro-processing and getting into farming. There are a lot of opportunities. However, it takes work not just from the agricultural side, but also work with the consumer, because as I suggested earlier, their tastes and preferences determine what ultimately comes out onto the market.
And finally, Antigua and Barbuda's Prime Minister Gaston Brown says his country will be borrowing to help stimulate economic growth. Mr. Brown, who is also Finance Minister, is forecasting an 8% economic growth this year. Antigua and Barbuda's economy has been battered for almost 2 years now, ever since the coronavirus prevented tourists from visiting the Twin Island nation. More from ABS Radio.
Prime Minister Gaston Brown, who's also Finance Minister, says he anticipates the economy will grow by at least 8% this year. 2022 budget will be geared at stimulating the economy, even if there's a fiscal deficit.
I believe we'll be presenting another $1 billion budget, possibly running a deficit again. And it's important that we do so in order to stimulate the country's economy. We may have to increase our borrowings as well.
Last year's budget was $1.4 billion. The Prime Minister says with more stability amid the ongoing pandemic, the government can use more resources to grow the economy.
Now is the time for us to borrow to stimulate the country's economy. If we had done so, let's say, 21 months ago, it would have been a wasted effort. So it's also about the timing of the spending that will determine whether or not you are effective or successful in stimulating the economy.
Jessica Russell, ABS News.
Antigua and Barbuda's economy grew by about 4% last year. However, the government had struggled several times to pay salaries and pensions. At 18 hours 13, we now bring you the international news from the BBC.
Hello, I'm Eileen McHugh with the BBC News. Researchers say preliminary figures show greenhouse gas emissions in the US rose by more than 6% last year. The independent Rhodium Group said the rise would make it harder for the country to stick to its pledges on emissions reductions. From New York, Michelle Fleury looks at the reasons behind the rise.
There were two things driving that. One was the surge in consumer demand has meant that more people are ordering stuff online, and that means that the roads are actually congested from freight, from big trucks driving on the road delivering those goods. The other factor, and perhaps sort of one that is a longer term trend that may concern people, is that you saw an increase in coal-fired plants as a source of emissions. That is in part a response to rising natural gas prices.
During a call with the Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, President Joe Biden has raised concerns about civilian deaths caused by recent airstrikes. Will Ross reports.
Relations have not been good between Washington and Addis Ababa, where the government has been upset by repeated criticism of human rights abuses during the war with Tigrayan rebels. The fact that Joe Biden and Abiy Ahmed held a phone conversation at all is perhaps a sign of progress. The White House statement says the two leaders discussed ways to accelerate dialogue towards a negotiated ceasefire. It also says the recent release of opposition leaders was a positive step. But the subject of atrocities was once again raised. Mr. Biden expressed concern over airstrikes just days after reports that more than 50 displaced people were killed in an attack in northwest Tigray.
Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov has warned the United States not to underestimate the risks of confrontation with Moscow over Ukraine. Speaking after a round of talks in Geneva, Mr. Ryabkov also said there was a basis for agreement and compromise was needed. For her part, the US Deputy Secretary of State, Wendy Sherman, said the Russians had told her they did not intend to invade Ukraine and that a build-up of Russian troops on the border was just manoeuvring. In an audio call with reporters after the talks, Ms. Sherman said Russia could easily end hostilities on the Ukrainian border if they so wished.
They can prove that, in fact, they have no intentions by de-escalating and returning troops to barracks. Return the troops to barracks, or tell us what exercises are ongoing and what their purpose is. That's not at all clear. One doesn't normally send 100,000 troops to a border just to sort of exercise. It's quite extraordinary.
The United States and the European Union have imposed sanctions against Nicaraguan officials and relatives of President Daniel Ortega, who will be sworn in for a fourth consecutive term later on Monday. The US, the European Union and other countries have accused the government of rigging the elections. World News from the BBC. Malawi's Attorney General has been accused of protecting the country's politicians after announcing an amnesty for people who defraud the government. Dabo Chakaka Nyirenda said for the next 2 months, anyone who admitted fraud or corruption would not face prosecution, provided they returned the money. This comes as Malawi's Anti-Corruption Bureau is trying to arrest the Land Minister, Kezi Masukwa, for a multi-million-dollar fraud involving a prominent British businessman resident in Malawi, Zunith Sattar. Both men have denied any wrongdoing. Investigators in New York are assessing whether a maintenance issue may have caused smoke to spread more quickly in an apartment block fire on Sunday. The city's mayor, Eric Adams, has revised the number of fatalities down to 17 from 19. 8 of the victims were children. He said an open door may have allowed smoke to spread more quickly. The apartment block was home to a large West African community. It's emerged that as many as 100 people received an email from the British Prime Minister's private secretary inviting them to a drinks gathering in the Downing Street Garden in May 2020. At the time, social contact was strictly limited, with England under full lockdown, as our political correspondent Helen Catt explains.
You could meet one other person outside at around that time when this email is understood to have been sent. Now, several sources have confirmed to the BBC that they received this email from the Prime Minister's private secretary, Martin Reynolds, and it was inviting them to a drinks gathering in the Downing Street Garden in May 2020. It explicitly asked them to a social event with distancing in place. We should say that 2 eyewitnesses have also told the BBC that they say they saw the Prime Minister and his wife at this event.
It's estimated that around 30 people attended the event. Mr Johnson has faced a barrage of criticism over alleged parties in government offices in breach of COVID-19 lockdowns. BBC News.
And that's the news to the moment.
KFC delivery is now available from the Amazonia location. For shore-based Little Diamond residents, call 632-0533, 632-0533, 6080-162, 6080-162, or 503-3591, 503-3591. That's KFC's delivery service from the Amazonia location. KFC.
It's finger-licking good.
To end the news, here's a recap of the lead stories. Leader of the People's National Congress Reform and the opposition leader met today. If you had Sputnik vaccines, the health ministry says you can now take a Pfizer as a booster shot. In the region, the governing Barbados Labour Party is promising to give workers the legal power to pick a trade union of their choice. And internationally, New York City officials are investigating maintenance problems that may have prevented an apartment door from closing automatically and allowed a deadly fire to spread in the Bronx. The news came to you compliments of KFC. It's finger-licking good.
This has been the news, compiled in the News Talk Radio newsroom. For ongoing updates, visit demerarawaves.com, and you can check facebook.com/demwaves and twitter.com/demwaves.